Her fiancé called her useless before the pack. Then the Alpha King claimed her as his queen. The soup had gone cold in Nina Webb's bowl by the time Owen Barrett said the words that ended 4 years of her life in a single sentence. She had arrived at the Barrett family home that evening with a careful effort behind every detail. The deep green dress was pressed and hanging exactly right. Her dark hair was pinned at the back in the way she had noticed, over years of attending these dinners, that Margaret Barrett seemed to prefer. Under her arm she carried a small box of handmade dark chocolates, wrapped in brown paper and tied with gold string, because she had remembered from a dinner conversation 14 months ago that Owen's mother preferred dark chocolate over milk. That was the kind of thing Nina always remembered. Small preferences, quiet details, the things people said without realizing you were filing them away. Margaret had taken the box at the door with a tight, polite smile and set it on the hallway sideboard without opening it. The dining room was everything it was supposed to be. Long and amber lit, the table set with real silverware and pressed white linens, and a low centerpiece of white flowers that Nina had ordered from the shop, 2 streets from her apartment that same morning, because Owen had mentioned the week before that it would be thoughtful to arrange the flowers for his mother's dinner. She had arrived 20 minutes early to make sure they were properly placed. 12 people sat at that table. Owen was at the head, which was where Owen always positioned himself, and the confident warmth of his occupation of that space was something Nina had once found irresistibly attractive, and had now, quietly and without making a deliberate decision, stopped feeling anything toward. Connor Pierce sat to Owen's right, as always, as though the arrangement had been established long ago and never needed revisiting. Helen Ward sat across the table, sharp and precisely dressed, a colleague from Owen's firm who deployed warmth strategically, and always knew exactly how much of it a room required. Gloria Hutchins sat to Nina's left, older, genuinely kind, the only person at any of these dinners who asked Nina a question and then actually listened to the full answer. The person beside her was already deep in a separate conversation, and she did not interrupt, and nobody noticed that she had poured it herself, which was fine. She had grown accustomed to not being noticed in ways that were not dramatic enough to name, but that accumulated into a weight that had no single identifiable source. Owen was already telling a story. He was gifted at stories. He understood their architecture better than most people, knew how to build tension and release it, how to position himself so that the version of him that emerged was always the most favorable possible. Nina had once stood at the edges of rooms watching him do this, and felt proud. She had loved the way strangers were drawn to him. She had believed, for a long time, that the magnetism she felt from across a room would always be available to her from up close. The distance between who Owen was at a distance and who he was in private had been one of the quieter discoveries of the last 2 years. She had not let herself say this out loud, not even to Lily, because saying it would require her to do something about it. The dinner moved through its courses. The soup was good, and she ate most of it, listening to the conversations on either side without entering them, which was a habit she had developed so gradually, she had not noticed it forming. The salad arrived. The main course followed, chicken in a cream and herb sauce with roasted potatoes, and a red wine that went around the table twice, and loosened the room noticeably. Gloria Hutchins leaned toward Nina during the main course, and asked about a project Nina had mentioned at a dinner 2 months ago. Gloria was the only person at these dinners who tracked what Nina had said at previous events. She answered with more animation than she intended, describing the museum redesign she had been working on in the evenings, not for any client, not for any commission, simply because she could not stop herself from designing things, because when she was tired of everything else the work was still interesting. She talked about the structural challenge at the east wall, the solution she had found at 11 on a Tuesday, the way the whole problem had rearranged itself once she changed one assumption. She used her hands. She was, for a few minutes, entirely herself. "You should submit it somewhere," Gloria said seriously. "That's genuinely impressive work." Nina looked down the table toward Owen, the automatic checking, the reflex she had developed so thoroughly she no longer noticed it. He was laughing at something Connor had said. He had not heard a word. She looked back at her plate. The conversation shifted, through a series of pivots nobody planned, to the engagement and the wedding plans, and what kind of couple Nina and Owen were. Someone asked something Nina did not quite catch, and Owen leaned back in his chair, with the expansive ease of a man who has never once doubted his welcome in any room, and he said it. She's honestly useless when it comes to any of the real planning. He made a small, casual gesture toward Nina without looking at her, the gesture of someone indicating a piece of furniture relevant to the conversation. I mean, she's pleasant enough, genuinely. But sometimes I wonder what she would actually do without me around to keep things moving. She should feel lucky I even noticed her, if I'm being straight with you. He said it easily, with a light laugh in his voice. The way a person says something they have thought so many times it has ceased to feel like an opinion and become simply a fact. The table received it the way tables always receive such things, with the collective, choreographed pretending that nothing has been heard. Connor Pierce's laugh held for half a beat too long, before arriving, uncertain. Helen Ward discovered something fascinating at the bottom of her wineglass. Gloria Hutchins made a sound beside Nina, barely even breath, the involuntary noise of a person who has been startled and is trying not to show it. Margaret Barrett reached for her glass with a hand that did not tremble and showed no expression at all, which told Nina more than any expression would have. Nobody spoke to Nina, nobody looked at her. The conversation moved forward within 20 seconds. Nina placed her fork down on the edge of her plate. She did it carefully, precisely, aligning the handle parallel to the rim. She put both hands in her lap beneath the tablecloth, and she pressed her thumbnail lightly against the inside of her ring finger. A small, private pressure, something definitively hers. And she breathed. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Her mother's technique, learned early. She thought about the ring on her left hand, the modest oval stone in the gold band that Owen had given her 3 months ago on the balcony of his apartment, on a night when he had been uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with the small box. And she had felt such tenderness toward him in that nervousness, such love for the human uncertainty of it, that her yes had come from a real place. She thought about that yes now. She thought about herself at 23, newly graduated from one of the best architecture programs in the country, standing in the departmental hall looking at the project her professor had displayed. Her project, her library redesign, the one that had won the regional award, and been shown in that hall for 3 years after her graduation. She had stood in front of it and felt the clean satisfaction of a person who knows exactly what they can do and has done it fully. She thought about who that woman was and where she had gone in 4 years. She thought about the job offer from Callaway and Reed that had arrived in her inbox 7 months ago. A senior design consultant position at a firm she had followed since university, in the city of Greenvale, 3 hours north. She had been so excited when she read it that she had nearly called Lily before finishing the email. She had shown it to Owen that same evening. He had frowned at the location. He had talked about timing and long distance and other opportunities. He had not told her not to go. He had simply arranged his doubts around the possibility, in a way that made the possibility feel reckless, and she had let those doubts fill the space where her own certainty had been, and within 2 weeks, she had turned the offer down. She thought about that decision now, in the amber light of the Barrett dining room, with her fork aligned on the edge of her plate and her hands folded in her lap, and she understood with the complete clarity of someone who has finally, after a long time, looked at a thing directly. She had not been sensible. She had been afraid, not of the opportunity, but of wanting it openly, of prioritizing herself in the presence of someone who needed to be the most important thing in every room. She ate the rest of the main course. She accepted a small pour of dessert wine because refusing would have created a moment, and she was not interested in moments tonight. She helped Gloria Hutchins carry the serving dishes back toward the kitchen after the main, which gave her 2 minutes of hallway quiet, 2 minutes with a woman who looked at her when they were alone, and said nothing, but looked in a way that contained everything that could not be said in that room. She said her goodbyes with care and genuine warmth. She thanked the host for the food. She kissed Margaret Barrett's cheek and said the evening had been wonderful. She shook Connor's hand and smiled at Helen Ward and felt the smile hold its shape with no effort, because she had been practicing this particular skill for years. In the car, Owen recapped the dinner with the satisfaction of a man who had performed well. He talked about his own stories. He mentioned Connor's comment about how well Owen was looking. He talked for the entire drive and did not once ask Nina how she had found it, because it had not occurred to him that her experience of the evening might be separate from his. She watched the city pass outside the window, the ordinary world moving in its ordinary way, entirely unaware that inside this car, a woman was making a decision she would not unmake. At her building, he kissed her cheek, warm, brief, familiar. She felt nothing particular, and the nothing was its own kind of answer. She went upstairs. She sat in the gray armchair, the one she had found at a second-hand shop 3 years ago, and recovered in soft gray fabric because she liked the shape of it. And she sat in the dark for a long time without turning the lights on. The city hummed outside. The ring was on her hand. She looked at her hand in the dim light from the window. She was not crying. She had expected, if this moment ever came, that she would cry. She had always been the kind of person who cried at things. Films, music, the particular sadness of a Sunday evening in winter. But right now there was nothing in her eyes except a vast, clear quiet, the kind that arrives when you have finally, after a long time of looking away, looked at the thing directly, and found that seeing it fully is easier than the looking away was. She thought about her mother, Ruth Webb, who had been a woman of great patience and great precision, and who had made one very hard decision when Nina was 6 years old, and had never apologized for it, and had never needed to, because the decision had been right. Ruth had said to Nina once, "The truth does not stop being the truth, because you are tired of looking at it. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is see what is real, and then decide accordingly." Nina looked at the ring on her hand. She got up. She went to the kitchen, and opened her laptop on the counter while the kettle boiled. She found the email from Callaway and Reed in her archived folder. She went to the firm's website. The position was still listed. Senior Design Consultant. Greenvale. Full creative scope. The exact work she had imagined herself doing since she was 21 years old, sitting in a university lecture hall, and understanding for the first time what architecture could be when it was done with real intention. She read the full listing 3 times, slowly, without anyone else's voice in her head. Then she opened a new message. She typed carefully. She introduced herself, referenced her earlier application, said she was available immediately. She attached her portfolio, the complete version, including the independent projects, the late-night work, the things she had pursued for no reason, except that the work called to her, and she had always answered it, even when she answered nothing else for herself. She moved the cursor to the send button. She held it there for 29 seconds. She counted, because she was the kind of person who counted in moments that mattered. Then she pressed send. She made tea. She drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the street below settle into its nighttime quiet. She thought about the morning, and what would come next, and she was not afraid of it. She was, for the first time in a very long time, looking forward. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges when she finally went to bed. She lay on top of the covers in the dark and looked at the ceiling, and did not sleep for a long time, and did not need to. By 7 in the morning her phone lit up on the nightstand. An email from Callaway and Reed. They were very pleased to hear from her. The position was still available. Could she come in for an interview the following Thursday? She wrote back in 4 minutes. "Yes, I will be there." She set the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought, one thing at a time. Then she got up and made coffee and dressed, and began the first day of everything else. Owen arrived at her door at 11 o'clock the next morning. She heard his knock before she was fully aware of hearing it. 3 sharp raps, a pause, one more. The particular rhythm she had catalogued without meaning to over 4 years. The rhythm of a man who assumed he would always be received, and had never been proven wrong about it. She was on her second coffee of the morning, standing at the kitchen window watching the Saturday street below fill with its weekend business, and she had known he would come, because Owen did not leave conversations unresolved on his own terms. He came when something needed tidying. She opened the door. He was holding coffee from the corner shop, her order, her exact order, which he had memorized in the first year and never forgotten, which she had always taken as evidence of genuine attentiveness, and which she now understood as something more complicated than that. He held it toward her with a smile that was warm but slightly compressed, the smile of a man who has prepared something, and is keeping it carefully in reserve. "Morning," he said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. He came in and moved through the apartment in the way he always moved through it, proprietorially, with the ease of a man who has decided this space is at least partly his, even though his name was not on anything here. He stood in the center of the living room, and looked at the bookshelves rather than at her, which was a thing he did when he was organizing a conversation internally before releasing it. "Last night," he said, "it got loose toward the end. People drinking too much, saying things that don't come out the way they're meant to. If anything I said landed in a way that didn't feel right. He paused. The sentence had been built to end, before it had to become specific. Then I apologize for that. Nina held her coffee in both hands and looked at him. The apology was technically formed. It had the grammatical shape of one, but it accepted no specific act, acknowledged no specific wrong, and placed the entire event inside the conditional distance of, if anything landed, as though the harm were a matter of landing rather than throwing. She had received versions of this apology before. She had accepted them, because accepting was easier than the alternative, and for 4 years she had been consistently choosing the easier thing. "What did you say?" she asked. He looked at her. Something flickered in his expression. Not guilt, not quite. More the mild irritation of a person who has prepared for one conversation and is being asked to have a different one. "Nina, tell me your own words," she said calmly. "Not the version of it, the actual words." He was quiet. He shifted his weight. He looked at the bookshelves again, and then back at her, and then at the wall behind her head. She waited. She had nowhere to be, and nothing to hurry, and she had decided somewhere in the night that she was done with the habit of filling Owen's silences to make things easier for him. "I may have said something about you that came across as more dismissive than I intended," he said. "You called me useless," she said. He opened his mouth. "You said I should feel grateful you noticed me," she continued, quietly. "In front of 12 people, without looking at me when you said it. And then you drove me home and talked about yourself for 20 minutes, without asking once how I was." "That's an exaggeration," he said. "Which part?" she asked. He did not answer. She set her coffee down on the kitchen counter behind her, and she looked at him, in a way she had not looked at him in some time. Directly, without the filter of 4 years of accumulated wanting to believe in the best version of him. "Owen," she said, "I have been adjusting myself to fit into this relationship for a very long time. I turned down a job offer, I moved across the city, I arranged your dinners, and remembered your colleagues' dietary requirements, and your mother's preference for dark chocolate, and the names of every peripheral person in your professional life. And I did all of it quietly, and without asking for credit, because I believed the arrangement of yourself around another person was the work of love." She paused. "Last night I sat at a table and heard you describe me as something barely worth noticing, and I watched 12 people choose not to have heard it, and I understood something I have been avoiding for longer than I want to admit. The arrangement has only ever moved in one direction. You're making something larger out of this than it is," he said. His voice had shifted into the cooler professional register, the one he used in meetings when he wanted to close a line of inquiry without appearing to close it. "I know," she said. "That's what I used to do too. Make things smaller than they were, so they would fit inside what we had." She walked to the windowsill, where the ceramic dish held her keys and loose change, and beside it, where she had placed it before going to sleep the night before, the ring. She picked it up. She turned and held it out to him on her open palm. "I want to give this back to you." Owen stared at it. His face moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise, something that might have been real feeling at its edge, and then the deliberate closing of a door behind his eyes that told her he had decided not to go through that way. "This is a very large reaction," he said, to a comment at a dinner party. "It is a considered response," she said, "to 4 years." They stood in the living room of her apartment, with the morning light coming through the window, and the ring on her open palm, and a silence that had no drama in it, only the fullness of something real being said and received. Owen reached out and took the ring. He slid it into his jacket pocket with the efficient movement of someone completing a transaction. "If this is what you want," he said. "It is," she said. He nodded once. He did not argue, did not make a last bid, did not do any of the things she had half expected and half feared. He picked up the coffee he had brought for her, still on the counter where she had set it, and took it with him on his way to the door, because even now the small automatic claim was still operating in him. At the door he paused with one hand on the frame and turned back once, with the expression she had learned to read as his assessment face, checking whether he still had any leverage left, making the fast internal calculation. "Good luck to you then," he said. She did not say anything. He left. His footsteps on the stairs were unhurried and controlled. The building door closed below. She stood in the quiet of her apartment for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and called Lily. Lily answered on the second ring, which was always how she answered when she had been waiting. "Hi," Nina said. "Hi." A pause. "What happened?" "I gave the ring back," Nina said. The pause was very short. "Are you okay? Where are you? I am literally putting my shoes on right now." "You don't have to." "I am already out the door," Lily said. "Talk to me." So Nina talked. She stood in her living room and told Lily the whole of the previous evening, the dinner, the words, the composed performance she had maintained through the rest of it, the drive home, the night alone in the armchair, the email sent before dawn. She told her about this morning too, the coffee held out in its careful paper cup, the apology that accepted nothing, the ring returned. She told all of it, and Lily listened without interruption, and Nina could hear her moving through her apartment, and then the sound of a door and footsteps on stairs. "I'm outside your building," Lily said. "Buzz me in." Nina buzzed her in. Lily arrived at the apartment door, 34 minutes after Nina had called, which was faster than the walk should have allowed. She stood in the doorway and looked at Nina, not looking for evidence of crying or calculating severity, just looking. The full look of someone who has known you for 14 years and does not need to assess anything. They sat at the kitchen table, and Lily made toast, because toast was what Lily always made when things were serious, and they ate and they talked for 3 hours. Not mostly about Owen, about everything surrounding him. The years, the adjustments, the gradual quiet compression of Nina into a shape that was not her natural one. The particular quality of relief Nina felt right now, which was not happiness yet, but was the clear and necessary precondition for it. Lily cried twice. Nina did not, and understood that this was what it felt like when the grief had already happened in advance, over a long time, quietly and without announcement, and what remained was simply the work of the next chapter. "So," Lily said eventually, setting her mug down, and looking at Nina across the table, with the warm directness of a woman who has been waiting for this conversation for longer than either of them had said out loud. "What happens now?" "I have an interview at Callaway and Reed on Thursday," Nina said. Lily looked at her. Something moved through her expression, not surprise, but the nearest possible thing to it for a person who has been expecting something and is hearing it arrive exactly as needed. "In Greenvale," Lily said. "In Greenvale," Nina confirmed. Lily reached across the table and held Nina's hand for a moment. She said nothing. She did not need to. 14 years of friendship had given them the economy of people who can communicate the important things without requiring the words every time. After Lily left that evening, Nina sat at her desk and opened her portfolio properly for the first time in months. Not the polished client-ready version, but the full archive. Every project she had worked on, including the independent ones she had pursued in the evenings and on weekends, for no reason, except that the work called to her, and she had always answered it, even when she answered nothing else for herself. She reorganized the structure. She added honest context to pieces she had never properly annotated. She made it the most complete and genuine record of herself as an architect that she could construct. She worked until midnight. When she sat back and looked at everything assembled on the screen, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt capable, fully, clearly, without qualification, capable. She went to bed and slept deeply. She woke up rested. On Thursday morning she dressed in the clothes she had chosen the day before. Not to impress but to be exactly herself, which she had always found to be the most effective strategy, and took the train north. The journey was 3 hours through countryside that changed gradually from city flat to something greener and wider, the sky broadening as the built environment thinned, and she looked out the window the entire way with the particular alert stillness of a person traveling towards something they genuinely want. She arrived in Greenvale with 40 minutes before the interview and walked through the streets to get the feel of them. The city had a quality she noticed immediately, not fully formed, still in the middle of deciding what it was, its older buildings and newer ones, in actual conversation with each other, rather than mutual avoidance. She found Callaway and Reed on a tree-lined street and stood outside the building for a moment before going in. The lobby was full of natural light and quiet, focused energy. The receptionist, Oliver, was composed and helpful and showed her to a meeting room with a view of the street. 2 partners and a senior consultant arrived at exactly the scheduled time. The interview lasted 2 hours and 10 minutes. They asked about her design philosophy in specific terms. They went into 2 projects from her portfolio in considerable technical depth. They asked how she navigated the tension between creative intent and structural constraint. She answered directly and fully, without hedging, because she had worked hard for a long time, and knew what she knew, and was done performing uncertainty she did not feel. She asked 3 questions back, not standard interview questions, specific ones about methodology and the balance between client requirements and design integrity, and how disagreement within the creative process was handled. They answered her as an equal, and she noticed this. At the end, one of the partners said, "Between us, you are exactly who we have been looking for. You will hear from us very soon." She walked back to the station, through the Greenvale streets in the afternoon light, and looked at the city around her, with the specific attention of a person who is deciding something. She thought about what the interview had meant, not professionally, though it had meant a great deal professionally, but in another way. She had sat in that room and answered questions about her work and her thinking and her approach to difficult problems, and she had done it as fully and honestly as she could, and at the end of it she had felt, simply, like herself. Not the managed version, not the version adjusted for somebody else's comfort, just herself, at full volume, in a room where that was exactly what was required. She had not felt that way in a professional context in 4 years. She had been competent. She had been reliable. She had done good work. But the doing of it had always had a slightly muffled quality. The quality of a person who is applying themselves fully, while simultaneously making sure not to exceed whatever the surrounding context would comfortably hold. In that interview room in Greenvale, she had exceeded nothing, and held nothing back, and the room had been entirely able to hold it. She thought about that on the train home, watching the countryside move past the window in the fading afternoon, and she thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. All along, this is what it was supposed to be. 3 days later, the formal offer arrived by email. She read it through once, confirmed the terms, and replied within the hour. Then she called Lily. "I got it," she said. Lily made a sound that was not a word, but contained everything. "Tell me everything," Lily said. And she did. 3 weeks moved through Nina's life, with the particular clarity of a person who has made a clear decision, and is now simply executing it. She gave notice on her apartment, which the landlord received with the polite regret of a man who had liked her as a tenant. She gave notice at her current firm, which was a harder conversation, not because she was uncertain about leaving, but because she had genuinely liked the people there, and the leaving required the honest acknowledgement that this place, good as it had never been where she was supposed to stay. She sorted everything she owned into 3 categories: keep, donate, let go. The keep pile was smaller than she expected, which told her something important. The gray armchair. Her books, which filled 4 boxes, and which she wrapped individually, because she had always been the kind of person who treated books as things worth protecting. Her design tools and portfolio, the long flat case she had carried since university graduation, the precise instruments, the notebooks filled with marginal ideas she had been too cautious to develop, her grandmother's quilt, which still smelled of something warm and old and safe, the plant on the windowsill, a trailing green thing she had kept alive for 2 years, through a combination of neglect and pure stubborn affection that she had come to find genuinely admirable in herself. The furniture she left, the sofa Owen had helped her choose, the dining table from the weekend market, the lamp that had never quite been the right height. All of it had been selected inside a different version of her life, and belonged to it. She did not want to carry it forward. Lily arrived on the morning of the move, with a hired van, and a large coffee from the shop at the end of Lily's street, which was Lily's form of showing up fully for something. They worked from 7 in the morning until noon, carrying boxes down 3 flights of stairs, in the rhythm of 2 people who have done physical things together before, and understand each other's pace, without having to discuss it. They stopped at noon, and sat on the bare floor of the emptied living room, with the window open, and the spring air moving through the space that no longer belonged to Nina, but that she had inhabited honestly for 3 years. "How do you feel?" Lily asked. Nina thought about it with the same honesty she was bringing to everything today. "Light," she said. "The same way I have been feeling since that night, like something very heavy has been put down, and I can finally feel where it was." "Not sad at all?" Lily asked. Not probing, checking. This was what Lily did. She checked the full weather. "Sad in a small, right-sized way," Nina said. The way you are sad about anything ending. Not in the way that means I've made the wrong choice. The opposite, actually. Lily nodded. She had always been good at knowing when not to press. They worked through the afternoon. Nina carried the last box down at 2 o'clock, locked the apartment, slid the key under the landlord's door, and stood on the pavement outside and looked up at the windows that had been hers. She felt the same thing she had felt inside. Not grief, but the quiet acknowledgement of completion. She had lived here honestly. She had tried here genuinely. She had grown here in ways she was still in the process of understanding. And now she was leaving, cleanly, with herself fully intact. Lily hugged her for a long time on the pavement. They were both crying, not from sadness, but from the weight of the moment itself. The specific, significant feeling of a real change actually happening. Not the version you plan in your head, but the actual physical thing, standing on a pavement in the afternoon light. "Call me when you get there," Lily said. "I'll call you the whole way," Nina said. She did. She drove north with Lily's voice in her ear, through the hands-free, for nearly all of the 3 hours. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation moving between serious and light and funny, the way their conversations always moved, landing nowhere in particular, while covering everything that mattered. By the time Greenvale appeared in the early evening distance, the city lights beginning against the sky, the shapes of buildings she was still learning, she was already a little in love with it. Not completely, not yet, but with the beginning of something that would grow. Her new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a narrow Victorian building, on a street she had already decided she liked. The ground floor was a flower shop called Wren and Company, which had finished for the day but whose smell, roses and greenery and something sweet and alive, and impossible to name exactly, drifted up through the floorboards in the evening quiet, and made the apartment smell, before she had unpacked a single thing, like somewhere she actually wanted to be. The landlord, Arthur, was about 70, with a slow and thorough way of explaining things that other tenants might have found excessive, but that Nina found genuinely touching. He showed her the water pressure of the shower 3 separate times. He was entirely, accurately correct about it. When he finally left, and she was alone with her boxes, she stood in the center of the sitting room and looked at the bare walls and the window with the evening sky visible through it, and felt, simply, good. The clean, uncomplicated good of a person in the right place. She moved her boxes in over 2 evenings. She unpacked methodically, kitchen first, bedroom second, sitting room last, and when she finally positioned the gray armchair by the window and placed the plant on the sill beside it, and stepped back to look at the two of them together, against the evening light from the street below, something settled in her chest that she recognized with some surprise as homecoming. The plant looked better here than it ever had in the old apartment. More light, she thought. It had always needed more light. She called Lily. "I'm in," she said. "Tell me about it," Lily said. She described the flower shop smell, and the excellent shower pressure, and the armchair positioned exactly right by the window, and the way the street below sounded different from what she was used to. More organic, less urgent, the sound of a city that had not yet decided what it was rushing toward. She told Lily about the strip of sky visible between rooftops, and the way the evening came in through the window, at an angle she had not anticipated, and that was unexpectedly beautiful. "You sound like yourself," Lily said. "Completely like yourself." "I feel like myself," Nina said. And then, because it was true and she wanted to say it out loud, for the first time in a while, maybe longer than a while. Her first day at Callaway and Reed was a Monday in late May. She arrived 20 minutes early, and spent those minutes standing on the street outside, looking up at the pale stone facade, and the glass, catching the morning light. She thought about the 22-year-old version of herself who had written a paper about this firm, and believed she might work here one day, and she thought about everything that had happened in the years between that belief and this morning, and she thought, this one is mine. Oliver at reception was composed and helpful, and showed her to her office, a real office, with a door and a window, and space enough for her to spread out, and introduced her to 2 colleagues before 9. Dr. Claire Norris was the first to properly introduce herself. She was the lead designer on 2 of the firm's major current projects, perhaps 10 years older than Nina, with the particular ease of someone who has done excellent work for long enough to have stopped needing external confirmation of it. She walked Nina through the current project portfolio, asked about her design philosophy, and within the first 20 minutes, asked her 3 questions that were sharp enough to constitute a genuine test. Nina answered each one directly, without the diplomatic hedging she sometimes defaulted to when she was trying to manage an impression. Claire's expression shifted subtly after the third answer. "Good," she said. "You're not going to be decorative around here." "I wouldn't know how," Nina said. "Perfect," Claire said. "We can use that." The first week required all of Nina's orientation. New systems, new processes, the particular rhythm of how this firm moved through creative problems. She stayed late twice, not because anyone expected her to, but because the work asked her to, and she had learned that when work was asking, the right response was usually to answer. Each morning she arrived to find at least 2 or 3 colleagues already at their desks working, which reassured her in a way she had not known she needed. She was in a place where people chose to be there. She walked home in the evenings through streets she was mapping without trying to, the bakery on Holt Road with the cat that sat in the window, the bookshop with the changing display, the corner near Wren & Company where a market set up on Thursdays. She learned each of these things not by seeking them out, but by paying attention, which had always been how she learned what actually mattered to her. She called Lily every second evening. She told her about the work and the colleagues and the way the project space had the particular focused quiet of a room where serious things were being done, and about Claire Norris, who was direct and exacting, and exactly the kind of person Nina found it easy to respect. She did not yet have anyone specific to tell Lily about other than colleagues, but the absence was comfortable rather than sad. She was still arriving. There was time for everything. By Friday of the first week she was tired in the clean, honest way of someone who has used their full self on something genuinely worth using it on. She walked home and bought bread and olive oil and good herbs at the market corner, and cooked a simple meal, and ate it, in the gray armchair, with the window open, and the flower shop smell drifting up from below. She called Lily, while the food was still warm. "First week," Lily said. "Hard," Nina said. "The good kind. The kind that reminds you exactly what you can do." "That's the best kind," Lily said. "Yes," Nina said. "It really is." She looked out at the Greenvale evening, the lit windows across the street, the strip of sky between rooftops going from orange to deep purple at the edges, the single tree on the corner in full early summer green. She realized she had not thought about Owen Barrett since lunchtime the day before. She turned this over honestly, not with guilt or any particular drama, simply honestly. She had not thought about him. He had occupied so much of her mental space for 4 years, managing around him, reading his moods, arranging herself relative to his reactions, and now he was simply not there, and the space where he had been was just space. Open, available for other things. She finished dinner, she washed the plate, she went to bed at 9:30 and slept for 9 hours and did not dream. When she woke, it was morning, and she was in Greenvale, and there was work to go to, and she was entirely ready for it. She thought about that first evening in the apartment above the flower shop, standing in the empty sitting room with the boxes around her, and the rose smell coming up from below, and the city going about its ordinary business outside the window, as though nothing significant had happened that day, though of course, something significant had, because things like this are significant even when they look, from the outside, like a person simply carrying boxes upstairs. She had thought about her mother that evening. Ruth Webb had made the hard move when Nina was 6, packed 2 suitcases and made arrangements and gone to the solicitor's office on a Tuesday morning with the kind of calm deliberation that looked, from the outside, like a person running a necessary errand. Nina had only understood this years later, when she was old enough to appreciate the courage that calm deliberation can conceal. Ruth had known what she was doing was irreversible. She had known it was right, and that the rightness would not make it easy. She had done it anyway, on a Tuesday, while Nina was at school, and she had been back for the school run at 3:30. Nina had her mother's hands. She had been told this her whole life, and had always taken it as a minor observation about genetics. She understood now that what people meant was something else entirely. The specific quality of steadiness that Ruth Webb had carried in her hands, and that Nina had inherited. Not biologically but by close and early observation. The quality of hands that do the thing when the thing needs doing, without requiring the doing of it to be easy. She had done the thing, and standing in the empty apartment with the rose smell and the city outside, she had felt, clearly and without drama, that she had arrived somewhere she was supposed to be. This was what forward felt like, she thought. Not triumphant, not relieved. Just correct, like a structure bearing the right load, Not straining, not groaning. Simply doing exactly what it was built to do. She had been built for rooms that were bigger, and work that was harder, and conversations that required more of her than Owen Barrett's world had ever asked for. She had been built for the specific difficulty of a project space like Callaway and Reed's. She had simply been somewhere too small, for long enough that she had begun to mistake the constraint for herself. She was not the constraint. She was what had been constrained. She held this thought for a while on the third morning in Greenvale, standing at the kitchen window with a coffee, and then she set it aside and got ready for the day, because she had work to go to and a city to learn, and she did not intend to waste any more mornings on what was behind her, when the whole of what was ahead was right there waiting. The second week arrived, and with it, the completely unexpected. Tuesday of the second week moved quickly from its first moment. Nina had a 9 o'clock review meeting with Claire and 2 colleagues on a residential project due for a client update by Friday. She had been through the project files the previous afternoon, organized her notes and her thinking, and was crossing the lobby at 7 minutes to 9, with her laptop bag over one shoulder, and a coffee she had made at home. The communal machine in the kitchen had never once produced anything she could honestly describe as strong. She was walking purposefully, not quite hurrying but aware of the clock, when the revolving door ahead of her completed its rotation, and released a man in a charcoal jacket, moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who has never in his professional life been surprised by a clock. She tried to step to the side. He turned at the same moment. The edge of her coffee cup connected with the left side of his jacket. Not the full force of the cup, but enough. A definite collision. A spreading dark stain across the charcoal fabric. She stopped. The words she needed arrived a half-beat late, which almost never happened to her. "I'm so sorry," she said. "That was completely my fault. I was moving too fast. I'm genuinely sorry." The man looked down at his jacket with a composed, unhurried expression. He was tall, taller than she had registered in the first second, with a face that was settled in the specific way of someone who was always in the act of considering something. Not blank, not performing, but very present in a way that she noticed, because it was unusual. He wore his jacket with the ease of someone who had stopped thinking about clothes long enough ago that the thinking was finished. His eyes came back to her face. "It's just a jacket," he said. 3 words, spoken without irritation, without performance. He looked at her for one more moment, steady, direct, not rude but very attentive, and then stepped to his left and continued toward the elevators. Nina stood in the lobby for exactly 2 seconds longer than she needed to. Then she walked to her 9 o'clock. She did not think about the man in the charcoal jacket during the meeting. The meeting required her full attention and she gave it. She thought about it briefly at lunch while reading through the afternoon's project brief, and filed it under mildly interesting and moved on. Oliver from reception appeared at the project space door at 2:45. He spoke to Claire, and then to the room. The conference room was set up for a 3 o'clock meeting with Cole Holdings, a partnership discussion on the Civic Center Commission. Nina looked up from her screen. Cole Holdings. She knew the name the way any serious architect working in sustainable design knew it, from publications, from case studies, from the specific professional admiration that attaches to firms that do what they say, at a scale that makes the doing genuinely difficult. She had written about one of their completed projects in a student paper. She had followed their development work through journals for years. They had built a significant portion of Greenvale's newer commercial architecture, and the buildings were without exception good, considered, careful, the work of people who understood that the built environment was not neutral. Claire appeared at Nina's desk at 5 to 3. "I want you in the 3 o'clock, she said, with the efficiency she brought to all decisions, no prelude, no unnecessary context. "Cole Holdings. Ethan Cole comes personally to these. He's not particularly warm, but he's rigorous about design quality, which is the kind of difficult that works in our favor." Nina wrote the name on her notepad, Ethan Cole. Then she gathered her materials and walked to the conference room. The room had the long pale wood table and wall of windows she had noticed on her tour, a good view of the older part of the city, rooftops and steeples, and the distant green of a park. She sat to Claire's left, arranged her laptop and notebook, reviewed the project summary she had pulled up, and waited. Ethan Cole walked in at exactly 3 o'clock. He was the man from the lobby. She registered it in the first half-second. The height, the bearing, the specific quality of settled attention. The jacket was different now. dark navy instead of charcoal, which meant he had changed after the lobby collision, which she noted without drawing conclusions from. He moved through the door and greeted the partners with the focused brevity of someone who respects other people's time enough to not waste it. He sat. He placed a closed folder on the table in front of him and said nothing. He did not speak for the first 14 minutes of the meeting, unless directly addressed. In Nina's experience of these rooms, the most senior person present almost always found a way to establish authority early. A repositioning comment, an early question, something to plant the flag. Ethan Cole sat and listened and let the conversation develop without inserting himself into it, and she found this more impressive than any number of early interventions would have been. When he did speak, it was directly and without waste. He asked 3 questions in the first 25 minutes. Each was exactly as long as it needed to be, and no longer. Each moved the conversation materially forward. This was the criterion for a good question, and the criterion most people in these rooms did not meet. Nina said nothing for the first 37 minutes. She was the newest and most junior person present, and she had not yet earned the right to be heard, and she was entirely comfortable with this. She listened and took notes and waited. When the discussion turned to the east elevation of the proposed civic center, specifically, the load distribution implications of the large glass feature proposed for the upper floors and its interaction with the support structure, she felt the answer arrive in her mind complete and clear, the way answers do when you have worked on the problem before in a different form. She let the conversation develop for one more exchange. Then she spoke. She laid out the structural issue in 3 sentences. She offered the solution in 2. She cited the engineering consideration, without making it technical performance, the balance between precision and accessibility that she had spent years calibrating. The room was quiet for a moment. Ethan Cole looked at her. Not the quick social glance of someone acknowledging a new voice. He looked at her with the specific quality of a person who has encountered something that has surprised them in a way they were not prepared to be surprised, and who is taking a moment to understand what they are looking at. "That's correct," said one of the partners. "More than correct," Claire said. "That's the cleanest version of that argument I've heard at this table." The meeting continued. The texture of the room had shifted slightly. The partners looked at Nina with a different quality of attention, and Ethan Cole, for the remainder of the meeting, directed 2 of his follow-up questions in her direction, not performed, not demonstrative, but with the natural precision of a person routing a conversation toward its most productive source. At 4:45, as the meeting concluded and people gathered their materials, Ethan Cole came around the table to where Nina was closing her laptop. He stopped in front of her. The lobby had been accidental and brief. This was deliberate and still, and carried the full weight of his attention. "Cole Holdings," he said, extending his hand. "Nina Webb," she said, and shook it. The handshake was firm, and held for 1 second past the functional. His eyes were direct and level, and gave her nothing except complete presence. "The east elevation answer," he said. "Where did you encounter that problem before?" "An independent project," she said. "A small museum that didn't get built." But the structural problem didn't care about that. The corner of his mouth moved, almost imperceptibly, but she saw it. "We'll be working closely on this project," he said, "if the partnership moves forward." "I expect so," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a person who has received a satisfactory answer and is complete with it, and went back to his goodbyes with the partners. Nina packed her laptop into her bag. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was doing something she noted without acting on. She filed it carefully, a thing to examine later, not now, and went back to her desk. The partnership between Cole Holdings and Callaway and Reed on the Greenvale Civic Center was confirmed the following week. She found herself, quietly and without drama, looking forward to what came next. She did not examine this feeling too carefully. She simply noted it, the way you note a change in the weather through a window before deciding whether it changes your plans, and went back to work. Which was always, she had found, the best thing to go back to. The first month on the project required all of her professional attention, and she gave it gladly, with the relief of someone who has found work difficult enough to occupy them fully, and interesting enough to make the occupation feel like freedom. She arrived early and stayed late. She came in on a Saturday in the second week when a calculation was producing results she did not trust. Each time she arrived early or stayed late, she found at least 2 other people doing the same, and the fact of this, A firm where people came because the work mattered, and not because they were required to, settled something in her that she had not realized needed settling. Ethan Cole was in the building twice a week in the first month. He moved through the project spaces with a focused economy she noticed, because she was professional enough to recognize what distinguished exceptional from merely competent. He did not make conversation that had no content. He did not linger in hallways. He arrived for meetings at the stated time, and left when the purpose had been served. His right hand, Patrick Voss, was a precise man in his 40s, who had watched Nina in the early project meetings, with the careful neutral assessment of someone determining whether a new person was as competent as they appeared to be. She did not perform for him, she simply worked. By the end of the second week he had stopped watching her quite so deliberately, which she took as the most favorable possible verdict. She and Ethan were professionally correct with each other in the first month. Direct, efficient, without social excess. He pushed back on 2 of her design decisions with technically sound reasoning. The first time she reconsidered and adjusted, because his reasoning was better than hers. The second time she listened fully, and then said, "I understand the concern. I'm going to stand by this. Here's why." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Make the case to the committee on Wednesday, and I'm with you." She made the case. The committee agreed. He said nothing after, but across the table she felt, rather than saw, the quality of attention that meant someone has taken note of something and will continue taking note. She had been wrong about people before. She knew this with the clarity of a year's honest reflection. She had been wrong about Owen Barrett, in the specific and costly way of someone who wanted something to be true and had looked only at the evidence that supported the wanting. This was not a comfortable thing to know about herself, that she was capable of that particular selective attention, but knowing it was better than not. You cannot correct a thing you refuse to see. What she was doing now was different. She was not looking at Ethan Cole with the eyes of someone who wanted him to be a particular thing. She was looking at him with the eyes of someone who was genuinely paying attention, and genuinely prepared to be disappointed if the evidence pointed that way. So far it had not pointed that way. 5 days or 5 weeks of evidence was not enough to know. But the quality of the evidence was different from anything she had accumulated in 4 years prior, and she noticed this. She thought about the lobby, and the 3 words, "It is just a jacket." She had been turning that sentence over for weeks, not because it was remarkable in itself, but because of what it was not. It was not a man performing magnanimity. It was simply a man who had assessed the situation accurately, a coffee stain, a stranger apologizing sincerely, an accident with no meaningful consequence, and produced the correct response. It is just a jacket, because it was. He had not made a small thing large to seem gracious. He had simply seen it clearly and responded accordingly. She had spent 4 years with a man who consistently made small things large when it served him, and small when it did not. She had tracked this difference constantly, without ever being willing to name it. She was naming it now, from a distance, because naming things was part of understanding them, and understanding them was part of not repeating them. The work of that understanding was going well. She was doing it in the right conditions, in a city that was hers, in work that asked everything of her, with enough distance from the previous chapter to see its shape without being inside it. She was making progress on it. She would continue to make progress on it. She filed Ethan Cole's last look across the table, the look she had felt more than seen, in the section she was keeping for things that required careful examination. That section was growing. She filed this too, in the section she was keeping for things to examine later. The section was getting full. Thursday of the 5th week, Nina was still at her desk at 7 in the evening, working through a stress distribution rendering that was producing a result she could not explain. The building had mostly emptied. The project space was quiet in the way it was only after 6. The ambient hum of the building's systems, the distant sound of the city through the glass, the particular stillness of a room that has held a full day of serious work and is now resting from it. She had been looking at the same section of the rendering for 40 minutes, and the stress reading was not resolving itself, and she was not going home until she understood why. She heard footsteps in the hall. She glanced up, and found Ethan cutting across the project space on his way out. He stopped when he saw her light on. "Still here," he said. "There's a stress reading in the east wall model that shouldn't be there," she said, and turned her screen toward him. "Given the support structure I've specified, this load distribution shouldn't be reading as a stress point. It should be fully absorbed by the diagonal bracing system. He came around the desk and stood beside her chair, close enough that she was aware of him in a different way than she was in meeting rooms, without a table between them and a formal agenda ahead, just two people looking at the same problem. He studied the rendering with the same focused quality he brought to everything. He did not speak for nearly a full minute. This was something she had come to notice about him. He did not fill silence with words he had not thought through, which was unusual enough in the people she had worked with to be remarkable. "You're right," he said finally. "That shouldn't be there." "I know," she said. "I need to understand why it is." He pulled a chair from the adjacent desk, unhurried, and sat beside her. "Show me the support structure file." She opened it. They worked for 40 minutes, and the quality of those 40 minutes was something she had not quite experienced before professionally. The particular focus of two people who are both good at the same thing, and have begun, without needing to announce it, to trust each other's thinking. They moved quickly because neither of them was waiting for the other to catch up, and they did not waste time demonstrating their own capabilities, because the work itself was making that case. They found the source of the stress reading at 37 minutes. By 40, she had the correction. "Good," he said. "We should have found this earlier," she said. "We found it before it mattered," he said. "Which is the correct time to find a problem." He did not stand up immediately. He sat for a moment, looking at the corrected file on the screen, and then he said, not with any particular weight behind it, just as a question he had decided to ask, "How are you finding Greenvale?" She looked at him. The question was simple and genuine, and had no agenda she could detect. "I like it," she said honestly. "It feels like a city that hasn't finished deciding what it is, like the shape of it is still being worked out. I find that more interesting than a place that already knows." He looked at her. "That's a specific way to describe a city." "I tend to think in specific ways," she said. "I've noticed," he said. He stood and picked up his jacket and said goodnight and left. And the quality of the space after he left was different from the quality of the space before he had arrived, which was something she noticed without fully knowing what to do with. She walked home through the Greenvale streets that were becoming genuinely familiar. The bakery, the bookshop, the corner market, the particular angle of light that came off the buildings on Holt Road in the early evening. She moved a little lighter than usual, and did not examine why. She went home and made dinner, and called Lily, and talked about the project, and a film she wanted to see, and did not mention Ethan Cole by name. She was not ready to say his name in a different context yet. The pattern of those evenings developed slowly, and then all at once, the way patterns do. Not always together. Sometimes she was there late, and he had already gone. Sometimes he was still in the building with his own team, and she simply worked alongside the general presence of it. But there were enough evenings across the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th weeks, evenings where they were both still there in the quiet Post-6 building, working at adjacent desks or in the project space, talking about the work and then beyond it, that the pattern became a thing she was aware of and did not move away from. He asked her one evening about what had brought her to Greenvale. Not the interview answer she might give to a professional contact, but the real answer. He made it clear by the way he asked that he wanted the real one. She told him about the opportunity and the firm. She hesitated for a moment, not long, and then told him about the change that had come with it. "I recently ended a long relationship," she said, not dramatizing, just being accurate. He said nothing immediately. He did not reach for a response before he had one. "He wasn't cruel in obvious ways," she said. "He was simply, the relationship required me to be less than I actually was, and I let it, because I had confused the accommodation with love. I kept choosing the smaller version of myself, and calling it consideration." She looked at the screen in front of her. 7 months before I came here, I was offered this position, and I turned it down. To stay. By the time I understood what that decision had cost me, it had been costing me long enough that I couldn't pretend otherwise. She was not looking at him when she said this. She looked at the project file, which gave her somewhere neutral to aim her voice. He said, "People who diminish others almost always do it because they're afraid of them. They dress it up as something else, but that's the root of it. Fear." She looked at him then. He was looking at her directly, in the way she was learning to recognize as the most honest version of how he looked at people, without the professional frame, without the composed public distance, just looking. "He was afraid of you," he said. He probably never understood that was what it was. She held that sentence for a long moment. They worked for another hour. When she finally stood and put on her coat, she had been in the building since 8 that morning and had barely noticed the hours pass, which was a thing that happened only when both the work and the company were exactly right. She walked home through the dark streets she now knew in both light and dark, and she thought about what it meant to be seen clearly, without flattery, without the careful management of impression that she had learned to perform for rooms that required it. She thought about the way Ethan Cole looked at her when the work was done, and they were talking about other things, as though she was exactly what she was, and that was exactly sufficient. Not impressive performance, not tolerated difference. Sufficient, complete. She did not name what she was feeling. She went home, and let the flower shop smell meet her at the door, and thought, there is time. Everything here is new. There is time for all of it. The weeks that followed developed the same way, through work and through the evenings after work, through problems solved together, and conversations that ranged into unexpected territory, and always came back to the feeling of two people who had both, separately, done the hard work of knowing themselves, and were now discovering what that made possible when they were in the same room. She told him, one evening in the 7th week, about the flat she had almost rented 3 years ago, the one with the light she had loved, the corner apartment near the park, that Owen had talked her out of at the last moment, citing the neighborhood trajectory, the commute, the noise. She had not thought about that flat in over a year. The memory surfaced unexpectedly, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. I stood outside that building for 10 minutes after we decided not to take it, she said. And I knew, standing there, that I was making the wrong choice. And I took it home with me and buried it. Why? He asked. Simple, not rhetorical. Because, she said, slowly, making the right choice in that moment would have required me to say, out loud, that what I wanted mattered more than what he wanted, and I hadn't built up to that yet. He was quiet for a moment. And now, he said. Now, she said. I'm in a city 3 hours from everything I had, in an apartment above a flower shop, working on the best project of my career. She paused. I think I've caught up. He smiled. The actual one, not the almost nothing. She noted it. She was compiling, without intending to, a catalog of the things she found remarkable about him. The way he listened with his whole attention. The way he changed his position when the evidence asked him to. The way he never spoke in professional rooms in a way that was different from how he spoke in private ones. She was noting all of it carefully, the way she noted things that mattered, and she was keeping the catalog for later, for the moment when she was ready to look at it honestly and say what it meant. She thought often, in those weeks, about the difference between the two kinds of professional proximity she had experienced. The kind that requires constant management of impression, where you are always slightly performing even in the most technical exchanges, and the kind she was in now, where the work itself was simply the shared object of interest, and the interest was mutual and direct and did not require any social scaffolding. With Owen she had never quite relaxed, even in the beginning. She understood this now with the clean retrospective clarity that only time and distance can provide. She had been calibrating herself constantly, her enthusiasm, her ambition, her opinions, to the frequency she had determined he preferred. It had not felt like calibration in the moment. That was the specific difficulty of that kind of adjustment. It becomes so habitual that you forget it is an adjustment and begin to believe the calibrated version is simply who you are. She had been working alongside Ethan Cole for 2 months, and she had not once calibrated anything. She had disagreed with him plainly. She had held her ground when she believed her reasoning was sound, and updated her position when his was better. In neither case had she spent the hours afterward, second-guessing whether she had responded correctly or wondering what he thought of her for it. She had been 4 minutes late to one meeting, because a calculation had required resolution first, and she had said so when she arrived, and he had simply moved to the agenda, and neither of them had treated the 4 minutes as anything other than what it was. This was ordinary professional conduct. She was aware of this, and the fact that she experienced it as a relief told her something important about what the 4 years before this had cost her, quietly, and in ways she had not yet fully measured. She was still unpacking that cost. She expected she would be for some time, but she was doing it in the right conditions now, in a city that was entirely hers, in work that asked everything of her and gave proportionally back, beside a man who looked at her the way she had spent years wanting to be looked at, as though the actual version of her was exactly enough. She thought about this sometimes in the late evenings in the project space, sitting at her desk with the work going quiet, and Ethan somewhere nearby with his own work, and she thought, this quality of ease, this exact condition of being entirely myself, with another person fully present, and the presence making things larger, rather than smaller. This was what she had been working toward without knowing its name. She had been keeping, without quite acknowledging she was keeping it, a kind of internal ledger. Not a list of grievances or an accounting of his faults. She was not interested in that kind of record-keeping. What she was keeping was a record of consistencies, the ways he behaved in professional situations, and the ways he behaved in private ones, and whether the two aligned, the way he handled being wrong, the way he handled someone else being right, the way he treated people who were not in a position to affect his outcomes directly. These were the data points that mattered. These were the things you could not perform consistently across months, without them being, in fact, simply who you were. She had been watching carefully. The ledger was very clear. She was not yet ready to say what she was doing with the information in it, but she had it, and it was real, and she was not going to look away from it, simply because looking at it directly required her to make a decision she was not quite ready to name. She thought she was getting close to that moment. She thought it was getting close to her. The Greenvale Civic Center public presentation was scheduled for the 12th week, and Nina had been preparing for it with the complete focus she brought to things that genuinely mattered. She was lead presenter on the structural and design sections, the most technically complex and substantial portion of the 2-hour session. The audience ranged from engineering-literate committee members to community stakeholders who simply wanted to understand what the building would be and why it was worth their attention. Holding both ends of that range without losing either required precision and the confidence to know when to slow down and when to move, and she had spent 3 weeks doing the preparation that made both of those things available to her. She knew the material, the way you know something when you have lived inside it for months. Not as a collection of facts to recall, but as a system she understood from every direction, every implication, every possible challenge. She rehearsed twice, not to memorize words but to find the natural rhythm of the argument, where it wanted to breathe and where it wanted to move. On the morning of the presentation, she arrived at the Civic Chamber at 7:30. The room was large and formal, with high ceilings and rows of seating, already beginning to fill with early arrivals. She spent 20 minutes verifying the technical setup because she did not leave these things to assumptions. She checked the slide transitions, the audio, the laser pointer. She arranged her notes in the order her mind moved through the argument and then set them aside, because she knew she would not need them. Then she stood at the window with a coffee and looked at the morning light moving across the rooftops of the older part of the city, and she let the room settle around her while she thought about nothing in particular. This was her practice before moments that required everything. Ethan arrived at 8:45 with Patrick and 2 members of his team. He spoke with the partners for several minutes and then came to where Nina was standing. "Ready?" he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her for a moment, with the honest version of his attention, not the composed professional face but the real one, the one she had been earning access to slowly over months. "You will be the best person in this room today," he said, stated, not offered. "The way you state a thing you consider factual." She met his eyes. "I'm aware of that," she said. The almost nothing at the corner of his mouth. She watched for it every time now. The presentation ran for 2 hours and 14 minutes. She spoke for 49 of those minutes without looking at her notes once, because she did not need to. She moved through the structural rationale with the ease of someone who has been inside a problem long enough to have made peace with all of its complications. She explained the sustainability calculations in real quantitative terms, rather than aspirational language, which produced immediate nods from 2 technical committee members. She handled a question about acoustic separation, with precision and without defensiveness. And then, near the end of her section, a senior committee member raised a concern about the load-bearing assumptions in the east elevation. He had prepared seriously, and had found a version of the exact problem she and Ethan had identified together at 7 o'clock in the empty project space 4 months ago. He laid it out with confidence, expecting it to be new information. Nina walked to the screen. She explained what the problem had been, when it had been identified, and the specific solution that had been implemented. She walked through the corrected model. She showed the engineering verification. She was unhurried in every word. The room went quiet. Not the uncertain quiet of people who are confused. The full, appreciative quiet of people who have just heard someone speak with complete and earned authority on something they know inside out. The committee member said, "Thank you. That answers my concern fully." And the session moved forward with a quality of confidence that had not been there at the start. Afterward, in the lobby as the room dispersed, Ethan found her. He moved through the noise and the post-session conversations with his characteristic stillness, and came to where she was standing. He looked at her for a moment, without speaking, in the way he sometimes did when he was not managing anything, and was simply present with whatever he was feeling. "You solved that problem before anyone knew it existed," he said, 6 months ago. "And you answered a committee challenge today with a solution that was already in the building. Since the night we found it together," she said. Something moved in his expression, not the professional version, the real one. "Have dinner with me," he said. Direct, not a suggestion wrapped in a question. A clear, honest request from someone who had decided to make it. She looked at him. He was asking simply, without arrangement, without strategy, without the careful framing of someone who is uncertain how the ask will land, and is protecting himself from the answer. He was just asking. "Not tonight," she said, because she was tired in the specific way of someone who has given everything to a room and needs the quiet of her own space before she can give anything else. But yes. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," she agreed. She stood at the window of the lobby for a few minutes after most of the attendees had moved toward the exit, looking at the morning light, still moving across the older part of the city. She let the room settle. She thought about what had just happened in that chamber, and she felt the particular clean satisfaction of someone who has done something difficult, and done it fully, and has nothing to apologize for in the execution. She had been in professional rooms many times where she was competent, and she had been in a handful of rooms where she was genuinely excellent, where the alignment between what she had to offer and what the room actually needed was perfect, and where she had been free to give it without managing any impression of herself. These rooms were rare. She was learning to recognize them. Today had been one of them. The committee member who had challenged the east elevation assumption had been prepared, and his challenge had been legitimate, and she had answered it with work that was already done, already verified, already in the building. Because 5 months ago, in an empty office at 7 in the evening, she had sat beside a man who had pulled a chair from the adjacent desk and worked through the problem with her without asking whether that was all right. She thought about that evening often. She had been thinking about it with increasing frequency and decreasing ability to convince herself it was only a professional memory. It was that. But it was also something else, which was harder to name, and which she had been putting off naming for reasons that were no longer fully convincing. She was standing at a lobby window, in the aftermath of the best professional moment she had had in years, thinking about a Wednesday evening 7 weeks ago, at 2 adjacent desks. She was aware of what this meant. She had been aware of it for some time. Saturday was coming. Saturday was 3 days away. She walked to the door to look for him, and she thought, "I am not afraid of this. I was afraid of something for 4 years, and I am not afraid of this, and that difference is the only thing that matters." She walked home in the early summer dark, thinking about the presentation, and about the project, and about the particular quality of the day, the way it had held, in the same hours, the most complete professional satisfaction she had felt in years, and the beginning of something else she was not quite ready to name. She went upstairs and stood in the sitting room in the dark for a moment, before turning on the light. She let the flower shop smell come up from below, and she thought about what she was walking toward, and felt, clearly and without the fear she might have expected, that it was good. Saturday arrived warm and unhurried. She wore the rust-colored dress she had bought in Greenvale in her 3rd week, chosen for herself, for how she felt in it. She walked to the restaurant he had named, a quiet place off the main street with an interior that was simple and well lit, and arrived on time. He was already there. He was not on his phone. He was simply at the table facing the door, and when she walked in he stood, which was a small, formal gesture she found unexpectedly warm, in someone she had come to associate with economy. They talked for 3 hours. The conversation went where it went, from the project to the city to their professional histories, and then into the territory that dinners like this one are really for. When the performance has dropped, and the people on either side of the table have decided, without saying so, that there is nothing to perform. He asked about the independent work, the designs she had pursued for no reason except that the work called to her. She answered fully, describing the museum project and the library, and the late-night hours she had continued putting into her own ideas since arriving in Greenvale. He listened with the listening that does not plan its response while the other person is speaking. She noticed this every time. She had noticed it the first time. She asked about Cole Holdings and the years before it became what it was. He told her about the decision to change the company's direction, the calculated bet on sustainable development made before the market was ready to reward it, the 2 years of genuine difficulty that followed, the point where the outcome was genuinely uncertain. "Were you afraid?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "Of failing, yes. Of being wrong, no. Those are different things." "They are," she said. "Most people don't make that distinction." He looked at her across the table. "Why did you stay as long as you did? In the relationship?" She did not look away from the question. She held it. "Because I had built an entire structure around him," she said. "Not with him, around him. And I kept maintaining the structure, even when the structure itself was the problem. I confused the effort of the maintenance with evidence that what I was maintaining was worth it." She paused. "And then he called me useless in front of 12 people. He said I should be grateful he had noticed me. And not one person at the table said a word." She said it plainly, without drama, because it was simply what had happened, and she had made her peace with all of it. "That was the night I stopped being able to look away." Ethan Cole's jaw was very still. Something moved behind his eyes that she recognized by now as his honest register. Not the managed version, the real one. "He was afraid of you," he said. "People who do that are almost always afraid of exactly the person they're doing it to. They call it other things, but it is fear." "I've thought the same thing," she said. "It took me longer than it should have to get there." They walked after dinner through the evening city. The conversation moved easily, through things lighter and things more serious, and the ease between them was the kind that is only available to people who have spent months in the same professional rooms, and have understood each other's thinking, and have already, without discussing it, passed through the stage of managing their impression. At the corner near Wren & Company she stopped. "I need to tell you something before we go any further in whatever direction this is," she said. "I'm not entirely sure I fully trust my own judgment about people yet. I made a long mistake, and I let it go on long enough that it cost me things I can't get back. The hardest part wasn't the cost, it was understanding afterward how I would recognize the difference between something real and something I've decided to believe is real because I want it to be." "What's your answer?" he said. She looked at him, at his steadiness, at the fact that he had asked for her answer rather than offering her one, at the tea he made for her without being asked, and the way he had listened tonight, as though her words had somewhere to land, and the way he had said, "You will be the best person in that room," with the flat conviction of someone describing a fact they have simply observed. "I trust what I've seen," she said, "not what I've been told. What I've actually seen from you, consistently, over months of real situations, and it's real." She paused. "I'm not fully there yet, but I'm moving toward it. And I want to keep moving toward it with you knowing that I am." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and unhurried. "That's all I'm asking," he said. "Not a rival, just the direction." She nodded. She went upstairs. She stood at the window and looked at the lit Greenvale street below, and the dark flower shop, and the buildings across the way, with their lit windows, and the particular beauty of a city seen from above on a warm June night. She felt the beginning of something enormous and precise and entirely hers, growing now in the direction of the light. She thought, standing at the window with the warm June city below her, about the specific quality of the yes she was moving toward. Not the yes she had once given Owen. That yes had been full of effort and hope, and the specific bravery of uncertainty leaning into optimism. A yes constructed from wanting rather than from knowing. The yes she was moving toward now was different at its foundation. It was built on 5 months of actual evidence, on real knowledge of a real person, on the specific and accumulated proof of someone who had been the same in every situation she had seen him in. It was being built the way she built everything she believed in, slowly, methodically, on a foundation strong enough to hold what would be built on top of it. She was almost there. Standing at the window in the warm night she felt it, the nearness of it, the fullness of the thing approaching, not with the anxiety of uncertainty, but with the clean anticipation of a person who knows what is coming and has spent enough time preparing to receive it properly. She let it approach. She did not rush it. She stood at the window, and she let the flower shop smell come up from below, and she thought, soon. And she meant it, in the best possible way. She would call Lily in the morning. Tonight she simply stood with it, exactly as it was, and let it be real. He told her he was in love with her on a Wednesday evening in October, over tea he had made and project materials they were no longer really looking at. It had been 4 months since the Saturday dinner. In those 4 months they had built something that moved at its own pace and without pressure. Dinners every week or two, evenings in her apartment or his, conversations that ranged through everything, and always returned to the feeling of two people who had, separately and before meeting each other, done the hard work of knowing themselves. He had been in her apartment enough times to know where the tea was kept, and that she switched from coffee at 7 o'clock, and that she liked quiet when she was working, but wanted music when she cooked. She had been in his apartment enough times to know that he needed 20 minutes of quiet after a long day before he could properly engage, and she had learned simply to let those 20 minutes exist without filling them, which she suspected nobody else in his life had thought to do. She had told Lily everything, incrementally, the way you tell your closest friend the things that are still forming, in pieces, carefully, with the deliberate restraint of someone protecting something new from being fully exposed before it has set. It was a Wednesday, because Wednesday was their project update evening, which had long since become also other things, an hour in his apartment or hers, with the materials open and the conversation moving between professional and personal, without requiring either of them to announce the transition. They were in his apartment. He had made tea, the materials were on the table. The complication in the acoustic modeling had been resolved. They had been sitting for a while in the comfortable quiet that had become, over months of these evenings, one of her favorite things about being in his company, the specific piece of silence between two people who do not need to fill it to prove they are present. He put his mug down. She looked at him. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "I'm in love with you," he said. Without prelude, without the constructed approach of someone who has rehearsed it into safety. Directly, the way he did everything, and with the precision of a man who had decided that carrying it without telling her had become a form of dishonesty, and that dishonesty was not available to him. "I have been for some time. I'm telling you now, because not telling you has started to feel like a lie, and I don't do those." The room held the sentence. She looked at him the way she looked at things she wanted to understand clearly rather than quickly. She looked at his face right now, which was giving her everything, not the composed professional version, not the carefully managed version, but the actual one, and the actual one was afraid. Not visibly, not in any way he would allow a room to see, but she had spent months learning to read the real version of Ethan Cole that lived underneath the public one, and she could see it clearly. This man, who maintained control of almost everything within his reach, had stepped outside that control, was in the air without it, and was genuinely and quietly afraid of what she was going to say. She had not expected this to move her. It moved her completely. "I'm frightened," she said. "I know," he said. "I made a long mistake," she said. "A very long one. And the hardest part of it wasn't the mistake itself, or even the ending of it. It was understanding, afterward, that I had been making it for long enough that my own judgment had stopped being fully reliable. I had been trusting my perception of something, and my perception had been wrong, and I hadn't understood this until it was unavoidably obvious, and since I left that relationship I've been asking myself, how will I know the difference between something real and something I've decided to believe is real because I want it to be?" He was very still. He waited. "I don't have a clean answer," she said, "but I have a real one. I trust what I've seen, not what I've been promised, or what I've wanted to believe. What I've actually observed, consistently, over months of real and difficult and ordinary situations. You've never been one thing, when we were alone, and another thing when other people were present. You've pushed back when you thought I was wrong. You've changed your position when the evidence asked you to. You've never made me feel your attention was conditional on any particular version of me." She paused. "I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm moving toward it, and I want to keep moving with you, knowing that I am." He reached across and took her hand. Warm, unhurried, no demand attached to it. "I'm not asking for arrival," he said. "I'm asking to be here while you do." She looked at their hands. She thought about the last time someone had held her hand like this, as though the holding was its own complete thing, and not a transaction. "All right," she said. She meant it from everything she had. She walked home through the October dark and called Lily before she had turned the corner. "Something happened," she said, when Lily answered. "Tell me," Lily said. She told her everything. She walked the whole way home talking, her breath misting in the cold air, the city quiet at that hour, and she told Lily every word, the mug put down and the direct sentence, and the fear she had seen in his face, and her own honest answer, and his hand on hers. When she finished, Lily was quiet for a moment. "Nina," she said. "Yes. That is the first time in as long as I can remember that you've talked about a man and sounded completely like yourself. Not the managing version. Not the performing version. Just you." Nina stood in front of her building with her key in her hand, and she looked up at the building, her city, her life. And she thought about what it meant to sound like yourself, and how long it had taken her to learn the difference between that and the performance of it. "That is exactly how it feels," she said. 6 weeks after that Wednesday, Connor Pierce saw a photograph. It had been taken at an architecture awards dinner, a formal evening at one of the city hotels, where Nina and Ethan had attended together. The easy closeness between them had been captured by a photograph taken for the Professional Association newsletter about the Civic Center project. It was not a dramatic image, but it was unambiguous to anyone who knew either of them, and Connor Pierce had known Owen Barrett since university, and had contacts in every circle that overlapped both cities. Owen called on a Tuesday morning. Nina was in the Callaway and Reed kitchen waiting for the coffee machine when her phone showed his name. She looked at it. She felt nothing that she could describe as dread or apprehension. She answered, because not answering would have given the call a weight it did not deserve. "Hello, Owen," she said. A pause. He had expected something different. More wariness. More edge. "I saw something," he said. "The awards dinner photograph, I expect," she said. "You look well," he said. The tone was not quite a compliment. "Thank you," she said, simply. He said, "He's not who you think he is." She said, "What do I think he is?" He paused. He had prepared for a different version of this conversation. "Nina." His voice shifted into the smaller, more honest register underneath the confident one. "I've been thinking about the dinner, about what I said. I've thought about it a lot. I'm glad," she said honestly. "I'd like to." "Owen," she said quietly. "I'm going to stop you, not because I'm angry. I'm genuinely not. But this call is about something that is complete, and I don't think going back to it helps either of us. I'm well. I'm building something real. I think you should be doing the same." Silence. "I want you to know," he said, after a long moment, "that I understand now what I couldn't see then." "I believe you," she said, "and I'm glad. But knowing doesn't change anything on my end." She ended the call. She poured her coffee. She went back to her desk and had the most focused morning she'd had all week. 2 days later he was on the pavement outside Callaway and Reed when she came out at 6. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets in the way he stood when he wanted to look casual and did not quite feel it. He looked tired. He looked, she thought, with genuine and uncomplicated compassion, like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had not yet found a way to put it down. She walked toward him. "Owen," she said. "I had to say it in person," he said. "I know that's not what you asked for." She waited. "I was afraid of you," he said. He said it with the difficulty of someone saying a true thing that does not flatter them. "I didn't understand that was what it was. I told myself other stories about it. But I couldn't manage who you actually were, so I made you smaller so I could manage that instead. And I told myself that was normal, that it was even affectionate." He stopped. He looked at the pavement. It wasn't. She looked at him carefully. This was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. It had come too late to change anything, and he knew it. And the knowing of it was visible in him in a way she had never seen before. "I believe you," she said. "And I'm genuinely glad you can see it now. It's going to matter, when you find the right person, not making someone smaller to feel safer. That's going to matter enormously." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through him. The particular shift of someone receiving an honest thing that costs them something. "Good luck," he said. You too, she said. I mean it. He walked away. She watched him until the corner took him from view. She stood on the pavement and took a slow, clean breath of Greenvale evening air. She called Lily that night and told her everything. When she finished, Lily was quiet for a moment. How do you feel? Lily asked. Nina sat in the gray armchair with the window cracked and the flower shop smell drifting up from below. Free, she said. Not dramatically, quietly. Like the last thing that needed to be finished has finished. Yes, Lily said. That's exactly the right thing to feel. Nina looked out at the Greenvale night, the lit windows, the strip of sky, the building across the street that she now knew, as well as any building she had ever known. She thought about everything behind her and everything ahead of her, and felt no resistance in either direction. She thought about the conversation with Owen for longer than she expected to that evening. Not about Owen himself. He had been exactly what she had known him to be, saying the things she had known he would come to say, and her own response had been exactly what she had prepared it to be. What she thought about was the quality of her own experience during the call, and then again on the pavement outside Calloway and Reed, the complete and genuine absence of anything that resembled regret. She had expected, when she imagined this moment, to feel something, not love. She had been clear about the absence of love for some time, but perhaps the residue of it, the particular ache that attaches to the ending of something that was once important, even when the ending is right. She had felt that ache, after the ring returned to the windowsill, in small and manageable quantities, for weeks afterward. She had expected it to return now. It did not return. She stood on the Greenvale pavement, watching Owen Barrett walk away, and she felt exactly what she had described to Lily later. Free. Not the dramatic freedom of someone who has escaped. The quiet freedom of a door that is finally, fully closed, and that has no further pull on you, because you have already built something real on the other side of it. She thought about the word useless. She did not often let herself think about it directly. She had processed it, and understood it, and arrived at the right conclusions about what it had revealed, and had tried not to give it more of her attention than it deserved. But tonight, standing on the pavement with the cool Greenvale air around her, she thought about it directly for a moment. She thought, I built this city. I built this job. I built this version of myself that walks through an October evening with complete ease, and has a meeting at 9 tomorrow that she is looking forward to, and has a man who told her 3 weeks ago that he loves her, and who she is beginning, fully, to love back. She thought, there is nothing useless about any of this. She thought, there is nothing useless about me. She let the thought sit for a moment, and then she walked home. She thought about what it meant that she had not argued with Owen, not on the phone, not on the pavement. She had simply stated what was true and let it stand, and she had felt no need to defend it or reinforce it or make sure he understood the full weight of it. This was new. She had spent 4 years in a dynamic where the truth required constant defending, where every clear statement invited a counterstatement, where every honest observation was met with a reframe, where she had learned, gradually and unconsciously, to spend enormous amounts of energy on the maintenance of what she knew to be true, against the constant low-level pressure to let the version of it that was more convenient for someone else be the one that stood. She was done with that now. She had said what was true, and it had stood on its own, and she had walked home. She thought, this is what it feels like to simply know something and not require anyone else to confirm it. She thought, I should have known this years ago, about many things. She thought, I know it now. That's what matters. She slept easily that night, and the night after that, and every night after that for the rest of the autumn. Everything unresolved had resolved. Everything ahead was open. The first formal introduction to Ethan's inner circle happened in December, at George Hale's house on the east side of Greenvale. Nina had known this moment was coming. She had prepared for it in the only way she knew how to prepare for things that could not be rehearsed. She decided, clearly and in advance, that she would bring nothing to it except herself, not a performance of herself. Not the accommodating, carefully arranged version she had spent years perfecting for rooms that required it, just the actual version. Specific, direct, entirely genuine, and she would let that be enough or not. She believed it would be enough, not from arrogance. From the simple clarity of a person who has spent the better part of a year learning the difference between what she actually is and what she has been performing, and who has found that the actual version is considerably more solid than any performance she has ever managed. George Hale's house was a large Victorian building on the east side of the city that had been lived in for decades, with obvious and genuine care. The kind of house that knows what it is, comfortable with its own age, not trying to be something it isn't. The bookshelves in the hallway were full and well used. The rug in the sitting room had been there long enough to have its own personality. The light was warm and deliberate, the light of a home rather than a house. George Hale himself came to the door and took Nina's coat with the easy, unhurried courtesy of someone who has been genuinely respectful of other people for so long that it is simply who they are. Not performance, just character. "I'm very glad you're here," he said. She believed him completely. Patrick Voss was already in the sitting room. He and Nina had spent months working alongside each other on the project, and their professional relationship had developed into the specific kind of mutual respect that grows between two precise people who have seen each other handle difficult situations with honesty. He greeted her now as himself, rather than as a colleague, which felt like a meaningful shift, and a generous one. Kate Orwell arrived 10 minutes after Nina. She was Cole Holdings' senior legal counsel, composed, watchful, with the specific authority of someone who is genuinely good at something genuinely difficult, and has not needed other people's confirmation of this for many years. She greeted Nina with the polite neutrality of someone who has not yet formed an opinion and considers it important not to pretend otherwise. Nina respected this immediately. False warmth before it had been earned was one of the things she had always found hardest to navigate. 6 people sat down to dinner at the round table in George Hale's dining room. A round table had been a deliberate choice, she understood, without needing it explained. No head, no hierarchy established in the seating before the conversation had a chance to establish its own. Kate opened the conversation about the Civic Center project with a depth of preparation that told Nina she had studied it seriously, not as social courtesy but as a genuine investment of attention, because Kate Orwell did not do anything casually. She asked Nina 3 questions in the first 20 minutes of dinner. The first was about the acoustic design strategy and how the competing requirements of the different spaces had been reconciled. The second was about the sustainability specifications and how the quantitative targets had been set and verified rather than left aspirational. The third was about the decision-making process when the east elevation structural challenge had been discovered, specifically who had found it, when, and how it had been resolved. Nina answered each one directly and in full, not to impress. Because they were good questions that deserved real answers, and because the only version of herself she had available this evening was the honest one. After the third answer, something shifted in Kate Orwell's expression, the precise, nearly imperceptible shift of someone who has received the caliber of answer they were testing for. "The east elevation solution," Kate said. "Was that yours originally?" "Ethan and I found it together," Nina said. "One evening, when we were both still in the office past 7, he saw the anomaly in the stress reading. I knew where to look for the source of it. The correction was genuinely both of ours." Patrick said nothing, but he met Nina's eyes briefly across the table and gave a single, small nod that told her everything she needed to know about where she stood with him. George Hale ate and listened and contributed a few specific, considered observations during dinner, but his primary activity was attending, watching and listening with the careful, generous interest of a man who has spent decades developing the ability to read people, and takes that ability seriously. He asked Nina one direct question, in the middle of the main course. How had she decided to come to Greenvale? She told him honestly. She told him about the long relationship and the gradual compression it had required of her, and the specific night that had made everything clear. She did not dramatize it. She told it plainly, as a fact of her history, because that was all it was. George Hale listened to all of it without interruption. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "That's a kind of courage," he said, "that looks from the outside like practicality, but it isn't." "It might have been closer to the end of being able to look away," she said. He looked at her. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "those are the same thing." After dinner, the group moved to the sitting room, and the conversation distributed into smaller pairs. George settled into the chair beside Nina's and said, without prelude, "The first time Ethan mentioned you, he was giving me a project update, a standard professional briefing. Your name appeared in that briefing more times than was strictly necessary, and when I didn't say anything about it, he noticed me not saying anything, and he stopped mid-sentence and said, She's remarkable. And then he looked surprised at himself for having said it. Nina looked at him carefully. When was that? She said. The third week, George said. She thought about the third week. The conference table, the meeting rooms, the east elevation problem, and the evening he had pulled a chair from the adjacent desk and sat beside her, and they had worked in the particular silence of two people who are learning to trust each other's thinking without having agreed to. He knew before I did, she said. He usually does, George said, with the specific smile of someone who has known a person for 30 years and finds him both admirable and occasionally exasperating. He's not always comfortable being the one who knows first. It exposes him. But he was willing to be exposed for you. That's not a small thing. For him, that is not a small thing at all. She held this. The people in this room love him, she said. I've seen that tonight. Real love, not habit or obligation. You've all chosen him, repeatedly, over a long time. That tells me something important about who he is. George looked at her steadily. And what about what you've seen yourself? That he's one of the most genuinely honest people I've encountered, she said. That he's been careful with me in a way I didn't know how to ask for. That he's never been different in private than he is in public, which is rarer than it should be. That he looks at me, she paused, finding the right word, like I'm worth looking at, not performing worth, actual worth. George Hale was quiet for a moment. Then, he's been lighter since you arrived in Greenvale, not metaphorically. There's been a weight he's been carrying, nothing you could point to easily. Just the particular weight of a very capable person who has been doing everything alone for long enough to have stopped noticing the cost. You've changed something. She looked across the room to where Ethan stood with Patrick, one hand in his jacket pocket, speaking with the ease that was his real ease. Not the professional ease, but the ease of a man who is among people he completely trusts. As she watched, he looked across the room and found her. The look he gave her was private and warm, and entirely for her, with nothing managed about it. She held it for a moment. Then she looked back at George. I feel lighter too, she said. George Hale nodded. The slow, deep nod of a man who has watched many things develop over many decades and knows when one of them is right. Good, he said simply. She thought about what it meant to be tested and to welcome the testing, because you had nothing to conceal. This was a new experience. She had spent years in rooms where the evaluation was continuous, and where her sense of her own adequacy rose and fell with the unannounced verdict. Because she had been giving Owen Barrett the authority to assess her, and he had exercised it constantly, and she had accepted this authority, because she had confused the need for his approval with the nature of love itself. She did not need the approval of the people in this room tonight. She wanted them to like her. She was not beyond wanting to be liked by people she considered worth knowing, but their liking of her was not a precondition for her being the person she was. She was the same person whether Kate Orwell approved of her answers, or Patrick Voss's assessment was favorable or neutral. She had arrived in this room as herself, and she would leave it as herself, and the verdict was theirs to reach however they reached it. This was not arrogance. It was something quieter and more durable, the ease of someone who knows what they are and does not require external confirmation to function. She had worked very hard, in the last year, to know what she was. She was not going to set that knowledge aside for a dinner party. Something happened in the room as a result of this quality, which she noticed, without fully understanding until later. The testing gradually stopped, not because she had passed a threshold or received a formal verdict, but because the quality of her presence made the testing feel unnecessary. You do not test something that has already declared itself fully. You simply receive it. George Hale saw this happen. She knew this because of the way his attention changed during the main course, from the careful evaluative quality of the early evening to the settled attention of a man who has reached his conclusion and is now simply interested in what he has found. His questions became more genuine and less pointed. He was no longer assessing. He was simply curious. Kate Orwell was slower to complete the shift, because Kate was more thorough by nature. But by dessert, the quality of her attention to Nina had changed from watchfulness to interest, which is a different and better thing. Patrick Voss said almost nothing about Nina directly all evening, but as they said their goodbyes and he shook her hand at the door, he said, quietly and without ceremony, "You're good for him. I thought you should know that someone who has known him a long time thinks so." She thanked him briefly, and meant it entirely. She thought about George Hale's house on the drive home, the bookshelves, and the warm light, and the round table, and the quality of attention in that room. She thought about the specific kind of people who surrounded Ethan Cole, and what that told her about him. You could not, she had long believed, fully understand a person by looking at them directly. People were too good at managing what they showed when they knew they were being watched. But you could understand them with considerable accuracy by looking at what they had chosen to keep close. The people they had made room for over a long time, the relationships they had maintained through difficulty, the ones who stayed when staying was not convenient. Every person in that room tonight had chosen Ethan Cole, not because he was impressive or useful or powerful, but because they found him, at the level of actual human knowledge, worth choosing. She could see this clearly. Patrick's respect was earned rather than assumed. Kate's loyalty had been tested and had held. George's regard was the regard of someone who had watched a person make difficult decisions over decades and found them consistently worth watching. These people did not love him for what he could give them. They loved him for what he was. She was finding that she understood why. She looked out the car window at the Greenvale night moving past and thought, I am going to love him too. I think I already do. I think I have been for some time, and I have simply been careful about saying so even to myself. She was saying it now, to herself, in the dark car on the way home from a dinner party at which she had been received as though she already belonged. She was saying it and it felt entirely true. The evening ended warmly. Kate Orwell said goodbye to Nina with genuine warmth that had not been present when the evening began. Not performed warmth, real warmth, which was the only kind Kate appeared to be capable of producing. Patrick took her hand and said he was glad to properly know her outside of the project context. George walked both of them to the front door and held Nina's coat for her in his old-fashioned, courteous way, and she thanked him for the evening and the dinner and the conversation. Outside in the cold December night, their breath misting, Ethan looked at her. How did you find it? He said. Good, she said. Honest. Nobody in that room wasted any effort on appearance. She paused. I like them a great deal. What did George say to you? He asked. He was trying not to sound as though he cared as much as he cared. She smiled. He said you've been lighter since I arrived. Ethan was quiet for 2 steps. He's right, he said. She took his hand. They walked through the cold Greenvale streets in comfortable silence, and she thought about what it meant to be received by the people who mattered most, to someone you were beginning, fully and without reservation, to love. Not performing love, actually feeling it, building it, choosing it, with both eyes open. She thought, this is what it was supposed to feel like. I just didn't know what supposed to meant until now. January arrived cold and clear in Greenvale, and with it a crisis on a separate coal holdings project that had nothing to do with the Civic Center and that came without warning in the way that serious professional crises do. Suddenly, with the particular urgency of a problem that has been present for a while and has now become impossible to not deal with immediately. A ground survey conducted for a building permit renewal on a residential development on the south side of the city had revealed unexpected subsurface conditions, a layer of fill material from an earlier construction period that the original survey had not found. The discovery changed the viable foundation options completely. The structural design as planned was now inadequate. The contractor had stopped work pending revised specifications, and every day of delay had a real and accumulating cost. Nina was not on this project. The Civic Center was her assignment, and it was in its final development phase and going well. But she was in Ethan's life by January, in the full and daily way, in his apartment several evenings a week, aware of his professional situation, with the particular awareness of someone who is actually threaded through another person's world. And so when the crisis developed, she felt it the way you feel a storm, when you are not outside in it, but you can see the full sky. He did not panic. She had watched him under pressure for 8 months, and she had not once seen him panic. He became more still when things went wrong, more focused, the way some people do when they have been through enough genuine difficulty to understand that panic is the one response that never helps. He moved through problems methodically. He slept less. He canceled 2 social commitments that week without apologizing for it, because he was not the kind of person who apologized for needing to work. She did not offer to help directly. It was not her project, and it was not her place, and she trusted that if he needed something specific from her, he would ask. What she did instead was simpler, and she thought, in the end, more genuinely useful. She was simply there. She made dinner when he came to her apartment late and did not ask him to stop working, or to talk about something lighter than the problem. She kept the conversation away from the crisis when he needed to rest from it, and toward it when he was in the middle of working through something and needed to think out loud. He called her on a Thursday evening at 10. She was at her desk finishing a specification review she had been meaning to complete all week. "Can I talk through the foundation options?" he said, not asking for answers, asking for the particular kind of thinking alongside that they had discovered they were both capable of, the kind where the other person's questions are more useful than their answers. "Yes," she said. She already had her sketchpad on the desk in front of her. They worked through it across 2 evenings. She asked more questions than she offered answers, because the questions were the more useful thing. They cleared the thinking so he could see the ground he was already standing on. She was careful not to overstate what she knew about the specific project, which she knew less well than he did, and careful to be very direct about the things she did know from her own extensive experience of structural foundation problems. On the second evening, an hour into the conversation, she said, "What happens if you shift the entire southwest corner of the foundation grid by 4 meters and use a raft system under the affected zone, rather than the isolated column footings?" Silence on the line. "Say that again," he said. She said it again, precisely, each word in its place, and then laid out the structural reasoning in 3 clear steps. Why the shift, why the raft system, why the combination of the two should resolve the fill condition that was blocking the original design. She heard him processing it in the particular way she had come to recognize, not the fast verbal response of someone reacting in real time, but the deep, focused quiet of someone who has found the shape of something and is turning it over carefully to make sure the shape is right. "That solves it," he said. "It might," she said carefully. "The survey team would need to confirm the raft system's viability, given the actual fill composition, but if the material is what the survey indicates." "It solves it," he said again, with the specific certainty of a person who has checked the work and is not speaking from hope. He called the next morning at 9. "Survey team confirmed. We're moving forward. It saves the timeline and the budget." A pause that was different from his usual pauses. "Nina." "Yes. Thank you." She smiled at her coffee. "You'd have gotten there yourself." "Maybe," he said, "but not before the deadline required it. The difference matters." The project resumed. The crisis resolved. She received updates on it in stages over the following weeks, and each one arrived with a warmth that was not about the project itself, but about the quality of what had happened between them in the working through of it. The specific intimacy of 2 people solving a hard problem together. The trust that requires and produces. The Saturday 3 weeks later, he arrived at her apartment with 2 bags of groceries, and no announcement, and she stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him move through the small space, organizing things into the refrigerator and the cabinet above the counter, with the ease of someone who knows where everything goes, because he had been here enough times to learn, and had paid attention, and had remembered. "You're cooking," she said. "Yes," he said, pulling out a jar and comparing it to a recipe on his phone. "Do you have fresh basil?" "Windowsill," she said. He went to the windowsill. He found the basil. He came back to the kitchen. She poured 2 glasses of red wine and sat on the kitchen counter, and they talked while the sauce built itself slowly in the pan, and the apartment filled with the smell of something warm and careful, and she thought, this is what a Saturday evening is supposed to feel like. Ordinary, and full, and completely real. He served the food. They sat at the small kitchen table, where their knees were close in the small space, and she thought about all the dinner tables in her previous life, the long formal ones, where she had been present and invisible. And she looked at this man, across this small table, in this small kitchen, in this small apartment, above a flower shop, and she felt completely, utterly, without a single qualification, seen. He put his fork down. She looked at him. He reached into the jacket hanging on the back of his chair, and then he pushed his chair back and got to one knee on the kitchen floor, the actual kitchen floor, with its slightly cold linoleum and the ordinary overhead light and both their plates still half full, and he held up a ring that was simple and exact, and held a stone the color of deep water in good light. He looked up at her. "I want to marry you," he said. I know the timeline is not what people expect, but I know what I'm looking at, and I know what this is, and I'm not a person who waits past the point of knowing. He held the ring steady, and his eyes were steady, and there was nothing uncertain in him, except the answer, which was the one uncertain thing, and the only one that mattered. You rebuilt yourself from a room where someone told you that you were nothing, and you did it quietly and without asking anyone to witness it. And you arrived in this city, and you did the best work I have seen in this industry, and you kept part of yourself for yourself, even while doing all of that. I've been watching you since the third week in ways I didn't have permission for. I fell in love with you before I had any right to. I would like to spend however long I have left being the person who already knows what you are worth and never needs you to prove it. She looked down at him from her chair. Her hands were quiet in her lap. The ring caught the overhead light. Outside, the February night moved through Greenvale in its cold, indifferent way. She was not crying. She was past crying, past the place where tears were the appropriate vessel for what she was feeling. She was somewhere deeper and steadier than that. The place where something is so true that it sits below emotion and simply is. She said, yes. And it was the cleanest yes she had ever said in her life, the most complete. Not the yes she had given Owen, full of effort and hope and the specific bravery of someone who is uncertain but wants to be brave. This yes came from a different place entirely, from the part of her that had been right all along, even when she had not been listening to it. From the version of herself she had found on the other side of the last year, the version that knew exactly what she was worth and exactly what she deserved and had found, finally and completely, both. He slid the ring onto her finger. He stood. He held her face in both hands and looked at her for a long moment, with everything visible and nothing hidden. She looked back. I need to call Lily, she said. He laughed, the full laugh, the one she had learned to wait for. He went to get the second bottle of wine. She called Lily before he came back. Lily answered on the first ring. Lily, Nina said. Lily said, oh my God. How did you know? Nina said. Because you sound like that, Lily said. Exactly like that. Tell me everything. She told her. She stood in the kitchen doorway with her voice low, and her hand holding the phone, and the ring on her finger catching the ordinary light. And she told Lily every word of what he had said, and every word of what she had said back, and the kitchen floor, and the plates still on the table, and the wine in their glasses. Lily cried through most of it. Nina smiled through all of it. When Ethan came back with the wine, and handed her a glass, and raised an eyebrow at the phone she was still holding, she said, Lily. He nodded, and sat back at the table and waited, because he had already understood that some conversations could not be postponed. She sat on the kitchen chair for a long moment after he stood, looking at the ring on her finger in the ordinary overhead light. She thought about the other ring, the oval stone and the gold band that she had worn for 3 months, and returned on a Saturday morning, to a man who had put it in his jacket pocket, with the efficient movement of someone completing a transaction. She thought about the difference between the two moments. Not the physical difference, the kitchen floor versus the apartment balcony, the pasta on the plates versus a clear evening, but the internal difference, the quality of what she had felt in each moment. In the first moment she had felt hope. She had felt the particular bravery of a person who is uncertain but wants to be brave. She had felt love, genuinely, but love of the kind that requires a great deal of work from you to sustain, the kind that is constantly asking you to adjust yourself to be worthy of it. She had felt the future as a project, something to be earned and maintained and carefully managed. In this moment she felt none of those things. Not because she felt less, but because she felt differently, from a deeper place, a more settled one, a place that did not require her to be brave, because there was nothing to be brave against. She felt clear. She felt, for perhaps the first time in the history of her romantic life, entirely certain without having to argue herself into the certainty. This was not a small thing. She had spent years thinking that the uncertainty she felt in the previous relationship was simply a feature of love, that the doubt was the cost of the depth, that the constant recalibration of yourself was what commitment required. She understood now that she had been wrong about this. Not wrong about love in general. Wrong about that specific instance of it. Love was not supposed to require you to be constantly uncertain of your own worth. It was not supposed to ask you to make yourself smaller in order to sustain it. It was not supposed to feel like an ongoing negotiation between who you were and who you were allowed to be. She was looking at what love was actually supposed to feel like. It was supposed to feel like this, like the most obvious decision you had ever made, like the easiest yes of your life, like something that expanded you rather than compressed you, that asked you to bring more of yourself rather than less, that felt not like an achievement or a project but simply like recognition. Like two people who had found their way to the same room and recognized, once there, that the room had always been meant for both of them. She looked at the ring and she thought, yes, this is it. This is what it was supposed to be. She was so grateful she had been patient enough to wait for it. They spent the rest of the evening at the small kitchen table with the wine and the food and the lit city outside and the flower shop quiet below, talking about everything that was coming, what they wanted the wedding to be, who they wanted there, the shape of the life they were building. They agreed on almost everything that mattered and laughed about the small things they didn't, and the laughing told her more than the agreeing did. When she finally fell asleep that night, late and warm and entirely herself, she thought, this is what I was supposed to arrive at. Everything before it was the necessary distance between that and here. The distance, she thought, had been exactly what was required. Not wasted, not lost, required. The wedding was in June, in the walled garden of a stone house on the north edge of Greenvale. Nina had planned it herself, which was how she had known, from the first conversation about it, that it was going to be exactly right. Not because she was a better planner than Ethan, he was an exceptional planner, precise and efficient, but because she had spent 4 years planning things for someone else's requirements, and had finally, something to plan from a place of genuine wanting. Every choice came from a real place. Every decision was made because they actually wanted it, not because it was expected, or because someone else would be disappointed if it were otherwise. The venue was a walled garden at a stone house she had found in her second month in Greenvale, on a route home from a site visit she had not taken before. The walls were covered in old climbing roses. The stone had the quality that stone gets when it has been warm for a very long time. She had photographed it on her phone that afternoon and sent it to Lily with the caption, "This one." Lily had replied within 60 seconds, obviously. 112 people were invited. Every single one of them had been chosen for love rather than obligation, appearance, or social accounting. Every guest at their wedding was there because Nina and Ethan had actually wanted them there. This was, Nina thought, the most significant difference between this wedding and the one she had once been trying to plan in another life. The difference between choosing for real and choosing for form. Lily arrived the evening before on the train from the city, and they stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning sitting on the kitchen floor of the apartment above Wren & Company, the specific kitchen floor that had become significant to Nina in a way that kitchen floors generally are not. And they talked the way they had always talked in the nights before something important, circling the center, touching it, moving away and coming back, covering everything without needing to be efficient about it. They were 30 years old now. Older than 22, but not so old they had lost what 22 had felt like, and what they had built across those years was richer than anything they would have known to want at the start of it. At some point past midnight, Lily looked at Nina across the kitchen floor and said, "Do you know what I keep thinking?" "What?" Nina said. "That you look exactly like yourself, not a better version, not the version you've been working toward, just you, the actual one." Nina sat with this for a moment. She thought about the dining room table, the ring in the ceramic dish, the email sent before dawn, the train heading north, the lobby and the 3 words, and the desk beside hers in the quiet late-evening office, and the tea made without being asked, and this kitchen floor in February, and every single moment in between. "Yes," she said, "that's how it feels." They slept. In the morning, Lily appeared at the bedroom door at 7, with croissants from the Holt Road Bakery, the good ones, with the right amount of butter, and they ate them, standing at the kitchen counter in their dressing gowns with coffee, talking and laughing in the way of 2 women who have known each other long enough to find everything funny and nothing embarrassing, and for a long while it was simply a morning. The apartment above Wren & Company smelled of roses all that morning. Wren & Company had arranged the flowers for the wedding, and the overflow of preparation had been drifting upward through the building since before Nina woke, filling the apartment with the particular rich living smell of a great quantity of fresh flowers. She stood at the kitchen window and breathed it in and thought, here, this is the morning of the rest of it. George Hale was at the stone archway of the walled garden when they arrived. He stood in a dark suit with the dignity of someone who belongs entirely to occasions of genuine significance, not the performed dignity of someone who has put on a suit for the day, but the actual quality that has been built into a person over decades of living with integrity. He came to Nina before the ceremony. He took her hand in both of his, in the warm and careful way he always did. "I want to tell you something before this happens," he said. She waited. "The first time Ethan mentioned you, he was giving me a project update," George said. "Standard professional briefing. And your name appeared in it more times than was strictly necessary for any professional purpose." He didn't notice he was doing it, until he noticed me not commenting, and then he stopped mid-sentence and said, "She's remarkable." And then he looked as though he had surprised himself. "You told me this at your dinner," Nina said. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you again today, because today is the right day for it." He held her hands. He has been waiting for a very long time, for something that was his equal. He didn't know he was waiting. He's not the kind of person who waits consciously for anything. He was simply alone, and capable, and carrying it all by himself, and he had been doing it for long enough to have stopped noticing it as a condition. And then you walked into a lobby, and spilled coffee on his jacket, and gave him 3 words back, and he called me that evening, and gave me a project update with your name in it, too many times. She felt tears arrive unexpectedly. She had told herself she would not cry before the ceremony, and had been mildly proud of this, and here she was. "Thank you," she said, "for him, for the dinner in December, for the way you all received me." "You didn't need receiving," he said. "You came in as yourself, and that was the only qualification required. We just needed time to show you we'd noticed." He released her hands. "Now go. It's time." He went back to his place among the guests. She stood for a moment at the edge of the garden. The roses on the walls were deep red in the June morning light. The chairs had been arranged in 2 curves rather than rows, her specific request, because she did not want anyone at this wedding to feel they were watching a performance. She wanted everyone to feel they were simply present for a thing that was actually happening, between real people who meant it. She breathed. She thought about Ruth Webb, her mother, who had said, "Your dignity belongs to you, and nobody can have it unless you hand it to them." The real meaning of that, she understood now, the meaning she had spent years applying in the wrong direction, was not that you endured with dignity. It was that you refused, clearly and without drama, to accept the story someone else had decided to tell about you. She had refused it, not in anger, not in the loud way of someone making a point. She had simply, quietly, with her whole self, declined the story and walked out of the room it was being told in. She walked through the stone archway. Ethan was at the far end of the garden in a dark suit, and when she came through the archway he saw her and his whole face opened. Not the composed professional face, not the carefully managed version, but the actual one, the man underneath both of those, and he was watching her walk toward him with everything he felt visible, and nothing hidden. She walked to him. They had written their own vows. He spoke first. He said, "I promise to make room for everything you are, and to stay genuinely interested in that room every day I have. I promise to listen before I advise. I promise to be wrong, without making it something you carry. I promise to see you on the days when you can't see yourself, and to remind you, without being asked, of what I already know." He paused. "I promise that the version of you I'm committing to today is the actual one, not the presented version, not the carefully arranged version, all of it, every day." She spoke. She said, "I promise to bring my whole self to this, not the performing version, or the managed version, the actual one, uncertain sometimes, stubborn often, still working on several things, and entirely genuine about every single one of them. I promise to trust you with the real version, because trust is what I came here to learn, and you have given me every reason to practice it with you. I promise to choose this every day, not as obligation, not as duty, but as the most obvious decision I have ever made." She paused. "I have made some unclear decisions in my life. I have confused performance for love, and accommodation for care, and patience for the same thing as staying when I should have left. But I am not confused about this. I have never been less confused about anything in my life." The garden was completely still. Patrick Voss looked briefly at the ground and then back up. Kate Orwell had her hand over her mouth. George Hale watched them with the expression of a man watching something he has been hoping for 30 years. Lily cried with the full, unself-conscious joy of someone who is simply and completely happy for someone they love, without restraint, without self-consciousness, with the total openness of a person who has known the other person through everything and knows exactly what this moment means. They were married. The garden responded with something warmer than applause, the specific sound of people who are genuinely moved by something real. At the reception, Lily stood with her glass and looked at Nina across the warm room, and she said, "I have known Nina Webb for 14 years. In those 14 years I have watched her be braver than she knew, and more capable than she was ever given room for, and more patient with the wrong things than any person should be. And I watched her, about a year ago, stop maintaining a life that was too small for her, and start building one that actually fit. I want to say, because I have wanted to say it for a long time and today is the day, that I always knew. I knew when she was 22 that the right room for her would be worth waiting for. I didn't know it would be in Greenvale, above a flower shop, with a man who fell in love with her in the 3rd week and didn't yet understand that he was already gone." She paused, to Nina and Ethan, who found their level. Every glass went up. Nina looked at Lily across the room and felt 14 years of friendship pressed into a single moment. All the kitchen floors and late-night phone calls, and the conversations that had fixed things, and the ones that hadn't, and the ordinary, extraordinary mornings of being known by someone completely. She mouthed, "Thank you." Lily mouthed back, "Always." Later, when the reception was warm and full, and the evening had settled into itself, Nina stepped out through the garden door alone. The sun was very low, the light long and gold across the old roses on the walls, the shadows deep and soft. The sounds of the party came muffled through the stone. She stood in the quiet garden and breathed. She thought about a dining room table and 12 people, and a sentence said easily, without weight, without even the effort of cruelty, just the casual certainty of a man who had never once examined what he believed about her. She thought about the collective silence of 12 people who had decided not to have heard. She thought about the drive home where no one had asked how she was, and the armchair in the dark, and the ring on the windowsill, and the email sent in the early hours of a morning that had changed everything. She thought about the train moving north through the widening countryside, the lobby and the charcoal jacket, and 3 words spoken without irritation. The east elevation problem, and the chair pulled from the adjacent desk. The tea made without being asked. The kitchen floor in February, and the most complete yes she had ever said. She thought about Ruth Webb, who had always known that the real lesson was not to endure, but to refuse to accept the story someone else had decided to tell about you, and to walk out of the room that story was being told in, and to find the room where your actual story was waiting. She looked up at the first stars appearing very faintly above the garden walls. She thought, I was never useless. I was simply, for too long, in the wrong room. And I walked out of it, and I found the right one. The door opened behind her. The warm sound of the reception spilled briefly into the garden. Music and voices and the specific sound of a room full of people who are exactly where they want to be, and then quieted as the door closed. She heard his step on the stone. His hand was warm at the back of her neck. She leaned back slightly, and he was there, steady and certain, and exactly himself, the way he was always there. "Ready to go back in?" he said. She looked up at the first star for one more moment. "Yes," she said. She turned. He was looking at her in the fading garden light with his whole face open and nothing hidden, the way he had been looking at her. She understood now, since approximately the 3rd week. She took his hand. They went back through the door together, into the light and the warmth and the sound of the room they had filled with all the people they had chosen, and everything ahead of them was right there waiting, exactly where they had left it. She did not look back at the garden. She had everything she needed where she was going.